Smoke crept low along the ceiling of the underground parking garage, rolling in heavy gray waves that swallowed the fluorescent lights one by one. What had once been a familiar, echoing space of painted lines and concrete pillars now felt like a maze designed to trap anyone foolish enough to enter. The air burned Ethan Cole's throat with every breath, sharp and bitter, as if the smoke itself were alive and clawing its way into his lungs. He held his son tightly, Noah's small body pressed against his chest, the boy's arms locked around his neck with desperate strength. Ethan could feel the rapid thudding of Noah's heart through his thin jacket, each frantic beat a reminder of what mattered most. Somewhere above them, the fire alarm wailed without pause, its shrill cry slicing through the roar of distant flames and the panicked shouts of people trying to escape. "I don't like this, Dad," Noah whispered, his voice muffled, his face buried against Ethan's shoulder. "I know," Ethan said, forcing steadiness into his tone even as his own fear threatened to spill over. "Just keep holding on. We're almost out." He wasn't sure if that was true. The power outage had plunged half the building into darkness, and the emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows that made every turn look the same. Ethan had been working late, pushing his cleaning cart between empty offices, thinking only about finishing quickly so he could pick Noah up from his sister's apartment and get them both home. Then came the smell, sharp, wrong. Then the alarms. Then the smoke. He had found Noah where he'd left him, asleep on a folded jacket in the small break room. The boy had woken crying as Ethan scooped him up, confusion turning to terror as the building filled with noise and heat. They rounded a corner, Ethan's shoes skidding slightly on the concrete dust, when he saw a figure ahead, someone slumped awkwardly against a pillar, half hidden by shadow and smoke. Ethan slowed instinctively, his muscles tensing. For a split second, his mind flashed with the thought of danger, of something collapsing, of a body already gone. Then the man moved. He tried to push himself upright and failed, a harsh sound tearing from his throat as he collapsed back against the pillar. Ethan stepped closer despite himself, heart hammering. The man's suit was unmistakably expensive, though now torn and blackened, the crisp lines ruined by soot and blood. One leg was twisted at a sickening angle, the fabric dark and wet near the knee. His face was streaked with grime, but even through the dirt and pain, there was something commanding about him, something familiar. Ethan froze. Victor Langston. The name surfaced instantly, unbidden. He'd seen that face on magazine covers, billboards, business channels playing on break room TVs. The billionaire owner of the very building they were trapped in. A man who lived in penthouses and private jets, not underground garages filled with smoke. Victor's eyes snapped up, sharp and alert, scanning Ethan first, then Noah. For a heartbeat, relief flickered across his features. Then his jaw tightened. "Stop," Victor said hoarsely. "Don't come any closer." Ethan hesitated, torn between instinct and reason. "You're hurt." "No kidding," Victor muttered. He tried to shift again, failed, and hissed in pain. "Listen to me. The fire's coming from the lower levels. This section won't hold much longer." As if to punctuate his words, a dull boom echoed through the garage, followed by a shudder that rippled through the concrete floor. Dust rained down, and Noah whimpered, clutching Ethan tighter. Ethan took an involuntary step back. Every survival instinct screamed at him to turn around, to run, to find the nearest exit and never look back. He could almost see it in his mind, cool night air, flashing lights, Noah safe in his arms. Then Noah lifted his head. "Daddy," he asked softly, peering over Ethan's shoulder. His wide eyes fixed on the injured man. "Is he okay?" Victor looked at the child, something unreadable passing through his gaze. "No," he said simply. "I'm not." He looked back at Ethan, voice sharpening with urgency. "You have a child. You can still make it out. There's a service stairwell 2 levels up, north side. If you hurry, you might beat the fire." Ethan swallowed, his mouth dry. "What about you?" Victor let out a short, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "I'm not walking anywhere." He gestured weakly at his leg. "And you don't have time to play hero." Another crack sounded somewhere overhead, louder this time, and a tongue of flame licked into view at the far end of the garage, casting a flickering orange glow that danced across the concrete walls. Victor locked eyes with Ethan. "Leave me and save yourself," he said, each word deliberate. "Save your kid." The world seemed to narrow to that single sentence. Ethan looked down at Noah, soot smudged across his cheeks, eyes shining with fear but also trust. Absolute, unshakable trust. He thought of all the nights he'd stayed awake worrying about bills, about rent, about what would happen to Noah if he ever failed him. He thought of the promises he'd made, to always come back, to always protect him. Then he looked back at Victor Langston, a man who had everything, now stripped of power and control, reduced to flesh and bone and pain. I can't, Ethan said quietly. Victor frowned. You can, and you should. Ethan set Noah gently down behind him, crouching to the boy's level. Buddy, I need you to stay right here. Hold onto my jacket, okay? Don't let go. Noah nodded, lips trembling but brave. Okay. Ethan tore a long strip from the hem of his shirt, ignoring the sting of exposed skin. He knelt beside Victor, the heat from the flames growing more intense by the second. He worked quickly, hands shaking as he wrapped the cloth around Victor's injured leg, trying to stabilize it as best he could. What are you doing? Victor demanded, though his voice wavered now. Buying us time, Ethan replied. And then we're getting out. All of us. You're insane, Victor said through clenched teeth. If this collapses, then it collapses, Ethan cut in, tightening the makeshift bandage. But I'm not teaching my son to walk away from someone who needs help. For a moment, Victor just stared at him, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Something in his expression shifted, disbelief giving way to something deeper, something like our regret. The smoke thickened, pressing down on them, making every breath a struggle. Ethan stood, bracing himself. Can you put weight on it? Victor grimaced, tested his leg, and shook his head. Barely. Ethan adjusted his stance, sliding Victor's arm over his shoulders. The weight was immediate and crushing, heavier than Ethan expected, but he set his jaw and held firm. Okay, Ethan said, voice rough but steady. On 3. 1, 2. They rose together, Victor stifling a groan, Noah clinging to Ethan's side as the flames crept closer, the garage groaning like a wounded animal around them. And in that moment, with the building threatening to collapse and time slipping away, Ethan knew there was no turning back. The stairwell door slammed shut behind them with a hollow metallic echo, sealing them into a narrow concrete shaft that felt more like a chimney than an escape route. Heat rushed down from above in suffocating waves, and the air was thick with smoke that burned Ethan's eyes and scraped his throat raw with every breath. The emergency lights along the walls glowed a dull red, casting the stairwell in a hellish haze that made the steps ahead blur and sway. Ethan tightened his grip on Victor, shifting the billionaire's arm more securely across his shoulders. Victor was heavier than he looked, his weight dragging down on Ethan's spine, but Ethan forced his legs to move. One step, then another. Each upward motion sent a spike of pain through Ethan's calves and lower back, muscles already screaming from strain and fear. Noah stayed close, his small hand clamped onto the back of Ethan's jacket, knuckles white. He didn't cry now. That almost scared Ethan more. The boy's breaths came in shallow, controlled gasps, as if he were mimicking his father, trying to be strong in a world that had suddenly become terrifying. Keep going, Victor muttered, teeth clenched. Sweat mixed with soot on his face, streaking down in dark lines. Don't stop. I wasn't planning to, Ethan said, though his voice shook. They climbed in silence broken only by the distant roar of fire and the shrill wail of alarms echoing through the concrete. Somewhere above them, something crashed, sending vibrations through the stairwell that rattled the metal railing and made Noah flinch. Halfway up the first flight, Ethan's foot slipped on a step slick with condensation. His heart lurched as he stumbled, catching himself just in time. Victor groaned as his injured leg jolted, and Ethan muttered a breathless apology. Doesn't matter, Victor hissed. Just don't drop me. The words were sharp, but underneath them Ethan heard fear, raw, unfiltered. Not the controlled confidence Victor wore in interviews, but the naked terror of a man who knew how close he was to dying. They reached the first landing, and Ethan paused, bending forward, hands braced on his knees. His lungs felt like they were on fire, each breath shallow and inadequate. Sweat soaked his shirt, plastering it to his skin. Ethan began, then coughed violently, the sound tearing at his chest. Victor shook his head weakly. No, if you stop too long, you won't start again. Noah tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Dad, I can help, he said softly, his small voice almost lost in the echoing space. Ethan forced himself upright, blinking through tears caused by smoke and exhaustion. You already are helping, he said, managing a strained smile. Just stay right there. They started up again, step by step. Ethan counted them in his head, clinging to the rhythm like a lifeline. 10, 20, 30. The world narrowed to the feel of Victor's weight, Noah's hand, the next stair in front of him. The heat intensified as they climbed higher. The stairwell felt like it was breathing fire down at them, each inhale bringing hotter air. Ethan's vision blurred at the edges, black spots dancing when he pushed too hard. At the second landing, Victor's grip tightened suddenly. "Ethan," he said, his voice low and urgent. Ethan froze. "What? If it comes to it," Victor said, swallowing hard, "you leave me. Promise me that." Ethan shook his head immediately. "Not happening. You don't understand," Victor snapped, frustration flaring. "You have a child. I have lived my life. You don't throw his away for mine." Ethan met his gaze, firelight reflecting in Victor's eyes. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing." Before Victor could reply, the stairwell door above them burst open. Thick smoke poured down, followed by a rush of cooler air and a booming voice. "Fire department. Anyone down there?" Relief hit Ethan so hard his knees nearly buckled. "Here," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. "We're here." Heavy boots thundered down the stairs. Two firefighters emerged through the smoke, their reflective gear glowing under the emergency lights. One of them took in the scene instantly, Ethan supporting Victor, Noah clinging close, and nodded sharply. "Okay, we've got you," the firefighter said. He grabbed Victor's other side with practiced ease. "Sir, we're going to take your weight." Victor exhaled a long, shaky breath as the pressure eased from Ethan's shoulders. Another firefighter crouched in front of Noah, his visor smeared with soot but his eyes kind. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Want a ride?" Noah looked up at Ethan for permission. Ethan nodded, throat tight, and the firefighter scooped Noah up effortlessly, settling the boy against his shoulder. They moved quickly now, guided upward by steady hands and firm voices. The rest of the climb passed in a blur for Ethan, his body running on pure adrenaline even as exhaustion threatened to pull him under. The door at the top burst open into the night. Cold air slammed into Ethan like a wave, sharp and shocking, filling his lungs and making him gasp. The sky above was dark, choked with smoke, lit by the strobing red and blue of emergency vehicles. Sirens wailed, voices shouted, and the building behind them roared as flames devoured its interior. Ethan staggered forward, then sank onto the curb as his legs finally gave out. His hands shook uncontrollably, and he pressed them to his face, breathing hard, trying to convince himself they were really out. Noah was set down in front of him, wrapped in a thick blanket that dwarfed his small frame. The boy threw himself into Ethan's arms, and Ethan held him, burying his face in Noah's hair, the scent of smoke and sweat and life overwhelming. "You did so good," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so proud of you." Nearby, Victor was being loaded into an ambulance, paramedics working quickly, voices calm and efficient. Despite the pain, Victor turned his head, searching the crowd. His eyes found Ethan. "Hey," Victor called weakly. Ethan stood, legs unsteady, and walked over. "You carried me," Victor said, a hint of disbelief still in his tone. "You didn't have to." Ethan shrugged, suddenly aware of how small he felt standing beside the ambulance. "I just did what felt right." Victor studied him, the city's lights reflecting in his eyes. "When I told you to leave me," he said quietly, "I meant it. Most people would have." Ethan glanced back at Noah, safe and warm in the blanket. "Then most people would have to live with that." Victor nodded slowly, something thoughtful settling over his features as the ambulance doors closed. As the siren began to wail and the vehicle pulled away, Ethan stood there, holding his son's hand, unaware that the choice he'd made in the smoke-filled stairwell had already begun to reshape both of their lives forever.